My fiance and I bought our first house in District 6 because we thought Fort Worth was where we wanted to be. Over this last year, sadly, we have lost faith in this city, its leadership, that's you guys, and especially the police. After the killing of Atatiana Jefferson, I'm ready to leave because no house is worth losing my life or the life of someone who I love. How can I raise a child in this city that is about to explode because of police brutality? The number one threat on my life is gun violence. Am I supposed to ignore this? We have no faith in justice, as it has become obvious that America isn't for us and neither is Fort Worth. How can we hope for justice with the district attorney office led by a known racist when she is backed by the very same police lobby killing us, totally giving her a complete conflict of interest, preventing her objective pursuit of justice for Tate? How can we hope for justice when your very own ex-police chief accuses his former employee, the city of Fort Worth, of racism? Come on now. Come on now. Fort Worth, your streets are a mess, and it's spilling over into the halls. David Cook, that falls on you. You're supposed to manage this city, is that not correct? The lack of leadership, that falls on you, Betsy Price. How can we feel safe if we die in our homes? Where are we safe? Maybe in a prison or a box, because that seems to be the only place you want us. How can we feel safe if we're being killed for flashlights? Chief Crouch, you haven't addressed that yet. You don't walk in our shoes. You're for the most part lily white and old. Young black, brown citizens are dying at epidemic rates. Wake up. Jurgis Jordan, you're my city council member. 14 years and you still sit at that same seat like a grand wizard. Betsy Price, your time is up. You have led this city into destruction. You want to spend money on consultants? We want independent citizen oversight. No more money to McKinsey and Deloitte. Also, your resignation for lack of leadership would be nice too. I would call for the FBI, but I have no faith in the federal government led by Trump and A.G. Barr. The system is rigged against us, and I am a walking target. Every day I pull out my driveway, and on my way to work, I fear that I will be killed. The status quo is comfortable for you guys, as you do not live this experience. You don't have guns pointed at you. You aren't being killed for living and breathing in your own home. Your arrogance and lack of compassion speaks volumes. You sit before us, not listening, inattentive, and frankly, disgusting. May you all reap what you sow in the upcoming elections. There is no such thing as a blue life. Every time I see you describe, you desecrate the American flag and further entrenches the belief that you are against us. You have added to the division.
Your time is up.
If you are a human being like the rest of us, then realize your badge does not give us the right to take my black life.
Hello, everyone. Once again, my name is Ohiro Oni-Eseleh. In these times that are not so unusual, that is a very unusual way for me to start my show. And it is not because I have little regard for my guests, but because my guests today are serious people and also very special. And we are going to be discussing some very serious matters. Today, we're going to be talking about the Black experience of racism in America. So I will now start by introducing them. We have Ms. Felicia Callis-Guerrier, who is a consultant and the CEO of Alabaster Consulting that focuses on professional development and also wellness. And we have Schanica Pickens, who is a social work educator. Dr. Brian Leander is also a consultant. He's an organizational strategist and the CEO of Leander Associates. And last but not least, we have Cynthia Swangin, who is a professor of social work. She is an educator. So Dr. Leander, my first question goes to you. You saw that clip that I just showed. Is that where we are? Is it the case that there is no place where a Black man may be safe right now?
You know, the answer to your question is a profound yes. There is no place where a Black man is safe in America. The illustration of that is that even as this young Black man got up, made his case, ran over time, the response to him running over time was two uniformed, I'm assuming there were court officers or people with authority, stood up around him, projecting upon him that he has violated something that is worthy of their presence. The illustration came very, very clearly, and I would say safety is relative, obviously, right? But he was not safe there, even though they were there to provide for the safety of everyone else in the room.
Right. I asked that question because as a Black man, that's one question that I have myself been wrestling with for the last at least 1 week, but I probably should have been wrestling with that much longer. Here are some of the facts that we know about some cases. We know that on March 13 of this year, just a few months ago, Breonna Taylor, an EMT in Louisville, Kentucky, was only 26 years old when police officers barged into her house. She had worked all day and they killed her. They said they were looking for someone, so they had a wrong address. It also turned out that the person they had been looking for was already in police custody. We know that on February 23rd, also of this year, again, just a few months ago, Ahmaud Arbery of Brunswick, Georgia, was killed by just three regular white men. These were not police officers, but obviously they felt that they could do that, even though just because of the color of his skin and the color of their skin. Mr. Arbery was only 25 years old. We also know that on May 25, Mr. George Floyd, who you were just talking about, was killed, and he was 46 years old. Police discrimination and violence toward Black and Indigenous people has been a concern that people have been talking about for decades in Canada. And recently, someone by the name Regis Packard was a 29-year-old Black and Indigenous woman who the police barged into her home in Toronto, Canada, and she fell out of her apartment to her death. And in the United Kingdom, Black, Asian, and minority ethnic group members are dying at alarming rates in police custody, which actually was the reason I asked, is there a safe place in the world for a Black person? And whether it's America or anywhere else, I find that there is no, it just seems to me that I have to agree with you, Dr. Leander, that there is no safe place. So, Cynthia, here is the reality. We Black men do not exist without Black women. We are in this world because of them. Therefore, the people that we have just referred to were people who had mothers. And we know that, you know, just the final minutes of Mr. Floyd's murder, he was crying out for his mother. It is not often that we hear 46-year-old men crying for their mothers. I just want to ask you, what does that make you think as the mother of Black children in this country?
As a mother of 2 Black boys, you know, it was disheartening. I mean, it was heartfelt. It hurt me to hear that, you know, a grown man was crying, but I understand the bond between a mother and the son. As you said, we are the first individual. We gave them life, sustained them. They suckled on our breasts. So there's a bond that's there and it's unbreakable. No parent, whether it's a mother or a father, wants to lose their child first. They always want to go before their child. I didn't see his funeral, but I can't recall if it was Al Sharpton who said, you know, possibly he was calling out to his mother at that time because he was seeing her in his spirit. I'm a very spiritual person. So, I know as a mother, it's our responsibility to cover our children. And as an African-American mother, I struggle with, having that fear because as a spiritual person, I know that I can set my child's life in the direction that it's to go. And that's a big weight on a mother's shoulder to feel that she's responsible. But in essence, you are responsible for your child. And hopefully as Black men, it's difficult, because many African-American women are raising our boys as a single woman. I was married, I'm divorced. And the presence of a male is very important for the bond. And for men, because we're women, we don't know how to teach. That's my big issue. I don't know how to teach my boys to be men, but I know that bond is still very much strong. I have my oldest son saying he's not going to leave his mother. We're everything to them. We have to give them our values, the morals. We are the example of what to be, a woman, hopefully that, they would fall in love with and raise a family with. So when you see a man beat down, stripped, it's disheartening because again, I often think about my ancestors who had to endure their husband being torn apart by horses when they broke in our men and took away the family. And it's hard to keep a family together and to see our men stripped of manhood. And that's what that was, stripped of manhood for him to call out. We are the first, I don't want to say like God to the baby, but that is, we are everything. We give them life, we give them food, we give them nurturance, discipline, guidance. So, it tears up a woman to see that. And as a mother, it's even worse because what I saw was just someone being humiliated. And that's a man. Where's the manhood in that? And that's what hurts me because the police strips our men from manhood.
Felicia, you heard me say that these are not really unusual times. And I said that deliberately because it seems to me that every time one of these incidents occurs, we talk. And then the authorities do nothing, and then we just move on. You would agree with me, wouldn't you, that this story continues to play itself over and over and over and over again? And if you agree with me, do you see an end to it?
So I'm a mom also, and I'm excited that I'm a grandma now. My son is 28 years old. Prior to this, I started doing a lot of research on epigenetics and how we hold trauma even in our DNA. And the healing part for us, and the thing that's most disappointing and heartbreaking for me, is that even though we're in a place where we have mental health workers, we're destigmatizing mental health, and we're trying to say, okay, our people need to heal, constantly being re-traumatized. So just like we do the work of healing, we need white people to do that inner work, that heart work, to find out why are they seeing us in the light that they're seeing us in. So this will be something that continues until each person do their individual spiritual work and realize what humanity is. So we're constantly trying to heal. We're constantly dealing with new traumas, being re-traumatized. My son was in daycare and they took him to the police precinct on a community trip. And they had to call me from work because he had a complete meltdown. He had never had any interaction with the police, but being 3 or 4 years old, being in that place, he could feel the trauma from ancestors. So when all of this happened, that's what happened when we heard him call out for his mother. we were feeling the generations of mothers who have wept, of mothers who have bled, of mothers who have gone through all of the trauma, the psychological trauma, the physical trauma. So the work is very, very, very personal and individual first. And that's what's most alarming.
Right. So, Brian, every time I hear the word trauma, I'm thinking of debt, that there is a depth to trauma. It can be psychological, it can be physical, it can be a combination of factors, but it's deep. So am I wrong then when I say, as I have said this week, if you are asking me what you should do not ask me what you should do. Perhaps you should start by recognizing and acknowledging my humanity. Am I wrong to say that? Or should I be giving people a template of how to accept me as a Black person?
First of all, asking people to, or placing upon you the responsibility of defining for them what it is to be a Black man in this society or any other society, or presenting them with a template, is in itself traumatic. So in many ways, it's a re-traumatization
Right.
towards you. It's this response of ours, by putting forth our condition and uprooting our pain, is itself a continuation of a cycle of trauma that, dare I say, like my sister said, has been built upon for generations and generations. However, our choice to accept it as trauma and still push forth is in itself liberating. So, if you can ask me to take blows for my children and for my brothers and sisters, at least I'm empowered to make a choice as to whether or not I'll take.
Amen. So, Schanica, the tendency to focus on racism as an individual experience or as a group experience is one that continues to leave us reeling, and we continue to lose in the process of trying to define what racism is. Because very often we see people in power say to us, that person is not racist. When I hear a white person tell me that another person is not racist, I say to myself, why don't you let me tell you how I felt about what he said? So when I hear people say, the man who just called my people such names is not racist, and I'm saying to myself, well, here is how I felt about it. Why don't you listen to how I felt about it? So it seems to me then that the conversation about racism really gets sort of truncated at some points because we do not address the systemic nature of it. So do you see where I'm going, and wouldn't you agree that one of the biggest problems with these conversations is that we do not take them to the logical end?
I would certainly say that, but I also want us to consider that racism is a social construct and it starts in the home. And so when you have that dynamic plays itself out in the home, it then spills itself into other environments as well as other aspects of one's life. Earlier you named quite a few who have been subjected to being killed by police officers. And so when you think about their training, having to go through the academy, when you think about their ongoing training as it relates to crisis intervention, de-escalation training, cultural competency, cultural sensitivity, we also recognize that the value of that information have been devalued because of the social contracts that's embedded within these various systems. And so a social contract within the justice system lends itself to a culture in which they've been cultivated. And their cultivation, although is supposed to serve civilians, is supposed to protect civilians, but these are the very same individuals who have developed a social contract amongst themselves. And that social contract speaks to spoken and unspoken rules. It speaks to common norms that they inherit, and there's no one providing the oversight to say that's injustice, right? The social contract in understanding how Amy Cooper, right, the young lady in Central Park, can contact the police on the gentleman and say that she was alarmed by him, she was afraid of him, she was threatened by him, right? She have learned that there's a social contract, right? One, her relationship with police. Two, the dynamics between police and Black folks. And three, the level of sensitivity and the heightened awareness that this will signify to someone within the justice system to act and respond. Not having to give any consideration to humanity, to integrity, to dignity of Black people.
Right. So, Brian, I will come to you with a question, but I want to leave you a quote to begin to think about before I come to you, because I'll go to Cynthia first. But I just want you to think about this. Dr. Vitale is a professor of sociology at Brooklyn College, and he is the author of the book, The End of Policing. In that book, he makes the following argument, just continuing with the systemic thought. He said, quote, "The reality is that the police exist primarily as a system for managing and even producing inequality by suppressing social movements and tightly managing the behaviors of poor and non-white people." And then he argued that those who bear the brunt of police use of force are usually those on the losing end of economic and political arrangements. And in other words, if you look at any other society, every society, including the United States, the police exist just to protect the privileged. They don't really exist for the rest of the people outside the privileged class. I just saw him on MSNBC this afternoon, and he was making the point that one of the ways, if we are really going to address systemic racism, one of the ways we have to go about it is to defund the police and divert that money that we're going to take away from them to other services that people really need. I want you to begin to think about that, and I'll come back to you to just tell me what you think about that. But in the meantime, I'll just go to you, Cynthia, and I will say this. You are a professor of social work. What do your students of color tell you about their experience within the educational system as regards race and racism?
Now, I'm not going to just speak to just my institution, but overall, but in my institution, it's rampant just because of the nature of who owns. It's a private college, and they have their own cultural issues. So it's more, so they see it as their culture. Our African American, brown, and Latino students see their culture of administration of the college as more important than they are, which mimics what the protesters are saying. We want you to listen to us. They feel they are not given fair treatment in academia. They feel that they're given the runaround. They feel that no one has time to sit down and give them the right answers. Now, I know what happens behind the scene too, that you have personal agendas for whatever reason in certain departments where they misadvise our Black and brown and Latino students and give them what they feel they should get. I think on the call yesterday, we've heard this, where students were told, you're in the wrong class, you're not going to make this, you don't do well. And that's what they do. Instead of providing our students the help that they need, they'll tell them, you're not good enough, you should get a blended degree. Don't stay in human services. Human services, is the department, which is social work. We know human services is the big umbrella that social work is up under. So they tell them to get a blended degree, which again is not as strong as if you have, a solid 3.0 in a solid division, one division, like whether it's psychology or sociology or education. So they want to give, they just shovel them as if they're a number. And if they're not heard and they feel it and they see it, and they often complain about it. But what they like with my institution is it's small, and you do have the few minorities that are working there. And for me, it was just because I'm passionate about education and I want them to get the truth and know how to navigate in a system that is embedded with racist policies and practices. And that's why I'm there, to tell them that you have to fight for yourself and to show them how to get what they need from an institution that's not really providing it and being upfront and transparent. So, myself and a few others were there to help guide them, because they feel the injustice, but then they also feel helpless to go somewhere else.
Right. So, Dr. Leander, you have been sitting with Dr. Vitale's point of view that I shared with you. If he is right, why do we teach our children that the police are there to protect them?
There are a lot of myths connected to the overall myth of justice in America, that it's equal justice for all. And once you believe in America, you will have to believe all the other myths that are connected to the utopia that America is supposed to be for all. Now, I know the reality is very different, but the myth is intoxicating. And for many white Americans, they have not experienced anything that will cause them to question whether or not that myth is a reality. But for Black people in this country, we are wide awake and well aware that it's just a myth, that it for the most part, or at best, is aspirational for some. America is aspirational for white Americans. But for us, we are left with the myth of justice. And then we are faced with mythical systems like policing that enforces the utopia for one class of people and keeps us suppressed, marginalized, vilified, and criminalized to justify the supports that they have for their existence. That's the reality. It is too simple to say police are bad. policing is bad. I just generally don't apply bad and good to situations like this. I think it's better to apply truth. And we hold these truths to be self-evident, that America is built upon racist, mythical foundations that need to be torn apart. The burden for doing such is unfortunately upon us.
Thank you. And I'd like to come back at some point to how we do that. And so, Felicia, much of your consulting work in the area of professional development actually centers around education. And I'm wondering what you tell educators when you think of the fact that, for example, if I went to school 28, 30 years ago, and students today are experiencing the same racism that I experienced at that time, it just seems that it feels as if the educational system really hasn't changed, despite what we say. So what do you tell educators when you do professional development work with them?
I make sure that they understand the history, our historical trauma, the history behind how Western education has not always served our Black and brown babies, to make sure they understand that the school to prison pipeline is real, to make sure they understand that if they are not a part of the solution with the school to prison pipeline, then they're part of the problem. To make sure they understand that they have to do some of the self-work before they come into the classroom, to make sure they realize where they're working. So I was working in Brownsville, and I had to, when we were hiring teachers, my question would be, why do you want to work in Brownsville? So a lot of it will be the why, and then to make sure they realize where you are. You are in a marginalized community. You are in a community that has been under-resourced. You are in a community that has high poverty. You are in a community where there's a lot of policing. You're in a community where there's domestic violence. How are you to help this situation? And to just make sure that they're giving the truth, to make sure that they have their own plan, their own intentions, and to know that our future is in this generation, that we must pour positivity into them, and that we must believe that there can be a change and that we can actually start from right here. So just to really, really give them the context of what social emotional learning is, what the historical trauma is, and why we are where we are in education, and what we need to do. So I really went in as a disruptor, and that was the reason why I couldn't just like stay in the DOE, because things have to be disrupted.
Yes, things have to be disrupted. And I come back to you, Cynthia, because I heard her talk about a pipeline to prison. And you are really deeply in the educational system. So it actually all fits together. How do we disrupt such that education or whatever we do, the kids who come there still do not end up in prison? Because it's all part of the whole racist process, isn't it?
Right. Well, that's almost similar to, depolicing, minimizing the presence, whatever contracts, we talked about contracts, social context, right? The school systems have to divorce themselves from the police and calling on the police when things are in trouble. Unfortunately, the store owner outside with George Floyd, he said he told his employees, we're not going to call the police anymore, because that's not, so every administrator has to take a stand. The principals, sometimes in human service, I say, what are you going to do? You're going to be that change agent, or you're going to just follow along? So whether, we are all mostly working in these institutions that will be racist. So are you going to be racist? Because if you're going to follow along with the plan, then that's how you become racist, because you're pushing those agendas. So one is that you have to have the administrators, again, this is everyone's work, to be responsible, to say, you know what, enough. We're going to do it another way. just me personally, I don't like to call myself an advocate. I just do what I know to do. And when I do for my children, I'm also doing for the community that my children are living in. And right before COVID, I was talking to the principal, trying to have a relationship where there are other programs that would help our children who are struggling, not just so academically, but with the other social problem, because that's what social work is. Any barrier that's going to prevent a student from learning, whether it's domestic violence, drugs in the home, we have to deal with those other issues in another way. And what I have been pushing also just in college where I working with the students who will be professionals, but also with like my kids in my personal community where I live with my children in elementary, is to put these proposals for those who have consulting businesses to try to partner with your schools. Because what I'm trying to push is like super brain yoga, some of the contemplative sciences, some of those other Eastern philosophy techniques that really work, like meditation, mindfulness, to help our children who are struggling and are hurting and have discipline problems, because that's what that school to prison pipeline is. You know, those who are going to detention, they're going to jail. What are they going to detention for? Because they have a lot of issues that, you know what? If they learn how to regulate, take deep breaths, control, know that there's love around them. You know, I'm always with the spirit, you know, the spirit, going back to spirit. So again, it's introducing, if you have, you know, these types of nonprofit programs, or just as I am as a concerned mother, and these are things that I have recently been delving into for myself, into metaphysics, into mindfulness, into yoga, meditation. These things work. Super brain yoga is proven to work. They work with ADHD, all different types, because it's a mind control, learning how to be able to focus. Our kids need to focus. So if we can have other types of programs in these schools that help children to regulate, focus, and not get into trouble, that is one big main way. So then the police, we won't have that pipeline, because it's about discipline. But if from the child to the elder, we are all responsible. And we can teach the kids to do that.
Schanica, when I hear the word disruption, as Dr. Leander and Felicia said, that we have to disrupt this. I am also thinking that the reference really is that we must dismantle white supremacy. So at the same time, I do understand the entire concept of white fragility. So as I hear them talk about disruption, and I am thinking the suggestion is we need to dismantle white supremacy. And then we, as Black people, are talking about white fragility. Doesn't there then come a point when it seems like we focusing on white fragility is sort of making excuses for white people to continue to support racism? Am I getting it wrong, or is it just, am I overstepping what that means for us? Is it our place to be making those excuses by focusing on white fragility in academia?
It's not our place to have to be apologetic for our experiences in which we internalize them by way of allowing for white people to think that we have to teach them about our experiences, and us forgiving them, right, and not challenging their belief systems and their lack of humanity and understanding of the Black culture. You know, just to kind of, you know, consider, you know, the pipeline to prison. I remember my son being in the 2nd grade. And this is the grade where they start the state exams. This is also the grade where these young folks are informed that if they do not pass the state exam, this is indicative of where they will land, which is the correctional facility. My son was advised of that. My son was traumatized as a result because he was advised that he was likely to become another member in the penal system. So Cynthia said earlier, that she doesn't particularly, refer to herself as an advocate. I do. And I am grateful that I never had to particularly feel apologetic for my son being a Black boy within an educational system that I hold standards to and for them, to educate him in a manner that's going to allow him to navigate the pipeline. And so I had to challenge the belief of the school. My voice was loud and very clear. And so I had to do the work in my own home to reverse his thought process, because the psychological trauma that's placed upon our children in the educational system is very much indicative to the penal system that they build for our children. And so when I think about the organizational structure and the organizational culture of elementary, middle, and high school, and how all of that plays itself out when our children get into academia, oftentimes it's very one of the same, right? Their inability to thrive because it's ran by a white administration that do not understand our culture, and the curriculums that are developed within each discipline does not speak to the needs of our youngsters. It's antiquated, right? It's full of, westernized knowledge. It does not incorporate the knowledge that speaks to the plight of our people, and that's Black and brown people.
Right. So, Brian, sometimes I don't know what I'm missing. So, in this scenario, for example, please tell me what I'm missing. Why is it that I see murder? I see a man who looks like you and looks like me being murdered. And I sit in meetings where I'm the only Black person. Everyone else sees a protest. I see a murder and they see a protest. And I see a statement about a tragic death. And for me, the man did not die in his sleep. A tree did not fall on him. He was killed. I see a killing and they see a death. What am I missing?
I don't think you're missing anything. You, like the rest of us, are still trying to put together the pieces of a very complex puzzle. I think, but as we observe this, what we are seeing, not missing, what we are seeing is that the murder of a Black man at the hands of a police officer can be downgraded to just a tragedy. Because even as the police officer had his knee on the Black man's neck, he still had more value in the society than the man that he was killing. You are not looking at two people who are viewed as equal in the equation. So the final sum can be brought to be a tragedy. If you were viewing two people who were perceived as equals, right, having equal rights under the law, then it would be communicated as a murder. That's what you're seeing played out. Once again, what you're seeing is a dehumanization of the Black man under the knee of the white man in authority. So I don't think you're missing anything at all. I think you, like the rest of us, are seeing what you've seen many times before. I think the people who are missing something are the people who can leave that image as just being a tragedy rather than having witnessed a murder. I take it even further. I think it was an assassination.
Obviously.
It was an assassination. Why? There was an attempt, an intent, I should say, to kill at a public level this singular man. This singular man was a public figure, and the murderer knew it. He saw the cameras. He knew that this would be viewed by all. This was an assassination. I don't think we're missing anything at all.
Right. And if I may add to that, this is not just one assassination. This is one of 400 assassinations, right? Because we're talking about racism that has been going on for at least 400 years. And we, as Black people, have been protesting quietly. We, as Black people, are tired. We, as Black people, are saying the revolution is now being televised. Enough is enough, right? Colin Kaepernick kneeled on one knee. That was peaceful, right? He didn't, take the basketballs and start throwing them at the audience. He didn't start, he didn't go get a gun and go shoot up a church like the white boy did. We're talking 400 years of this. And how is it that white America cannot understand why we're rioting? Right? Because as Martin Luther King said, rioting is the voices of the unheard. We have not been heard then and even now. Right? The protests are being deemed as violent. That's what they're depicting on social media, on our television. So even as we consider the space we're in now, we must also consider psychological trauma that it is placing upon our youth. And stop referring to them as at-risk youth. Because at-risk youth only implies that it's our Black and brown children. Our children are not at risk, not in the context in which white America places them. Our children are kings and queens. And that's the cultivation that we give our children. Not that person, Trump, that told our children, told us boldly that we're thugs. And no one challenged it. And again, we as Black people are quiet. It is now that we're lifting our voices to sing and sing loud.
Right. So, Cynthia, and I would like everyone else to also begin to think about it. What can we do and what should we be doing now on our own individually? What should we be doing?
Good question. Because again, we are only responsible for our own self. I would love to say these are the things, we should do. We should make sure that the Senate have term limits, we should vote. Bills should be transparent, but that's the bigger picture when that's a collective effort. But each one of us has a responsibility. And like when you asked in the beginning, when, as a mother, seeing George Floyd and him crying out, one good thing I got out of it, because I have two kids, 10 and 12. I said, Lord, y'all don't listen to your mother. I just keep repeating. But obviously that also showed me that, wow, he cried out for his mom. That means the mother is important in our children's role, no matter what we think. They didn't hear us. They heard us, because he cried out to mom. So that means that, they've listened. And again, the job, a role of a parent, and then just individual, each one of us, what we can do is be responsible, and again, I go back to the spirit, because I think that's the problem. We are not connected to who we are. We're spirit beings first. I always say that. And humanity, we're all now having a human experience, because I don't know what to tell white people. It's up to them, right? I can't tell them anything else, and it's not our responsibility. But again, every one of us can close our eyes. 15 minutes, that's all it takes to sit with that understanding of who we are, what's our responsibility to make change, and what was my part in this. Everyone is responsible for their own self. Okay, because when I close my eyes, I can't take you, I can't ask about you again. Because even when it says, oh, what about you? Oh, I'm asking about you. Don't tell me about what this person, I'm all focused. So it's now, each one of us need to focus on ourselves for being the better self, to operate out of our higher sense of self, which is that connectivity that all of us share, because we are one. Most of us don't believe that, but that is the humanity problem. Why is it that people cannot look at me and see a human or a spirit being that has the same fears, emotions, mind, bleed red? We are the same. We come from a social construct. We have a family. We have values. We have a religion, or we don't have a religion. We have education. We are all in it the same, no matter what ethnicity or background. So it is now every one person's charge to sit and be still and know who they are. Especially our Black people. We need to know when we sit down and we are worthy. We are somebody. Like Schanica said, kings and queens. I go further to say gods and goddesses. That's who we are. Until we look at ourselves and see God within us and the spirit moving for, through, and in us.
But Black people have known that for a long time.
No.
They have been waiting for 401 years and singing the spirituals, and the Black church is still singing. And I am thinking that there needs to be something done still. So what is it that individually we can do to disrupt white supremacy so that we can finally be free?
Individually. So when I say that and being responsible, because you're right, we've been singing the hymns and hums, but that framework, the singing back, was also singing to a God that lived outside of themselves, to a God that somebody search it, save me, God. That's wrong. God is within. So yeah, it's been 400 years also the same. When we look at especially Black America, whose Bible are we reading? And I grew up in the church, and I'm not here to say that the church is wrong and all of that, but
Right.
guess what? We are now responsible.
Right. I can
Because we
tell
were
you.
looking for the church, and it's not about the same mindset, because there's a different mindset. That mindset before was God was outside going to save me. No, now when you sit still and know who you are, you're going to save yourself. So the answers will come in that revelational knowledge of what each one of us to do, because that's even unfair to ask us collectively as Black people, what are we going to do? Each one of us, because I don't know specifically what can I tell Schanica, what can I tell Brian, Felicia, or you to do. But when we all sit in the spirit will tell you what you specifically have to do. And it, like she said, Schanica, it'll start in your home. And then when you go outside to your neighbor, and then it's to your community, however it pans out, but it starts with self. And it's not that same old him and the good old Negro spirituals and stuff.
Right,
Because there was
Felicia.
this God that was outside of themselves.
Right,
And they
Felicia.
didn't realize the power.
Right, Felicia, what should each of us be doing?
I think each of us should be looking at how Tulsa, Oklahoma had started the Black Wall Street and tried to really focus on economic freedom. I know that the information that my kids have about financial literacy, I didn't have. So pushing them to be entrepreneurial minded, pushing them to just know like the whole truth, but definitely pushing towards Black dollars, Black community, Black building, Black power. Buy the block back, build our own schools. We have work to do.
We do have work to do. Schanica, what should each of us be doing?
Each of us should have a vested interest in the cause. Each of us have to recognize that we do not stand in this fight singular. It's a collective fight. And we have to believe that justice will be served. Speak positively about the change to come. Keep our eyes on the prize, and that's our young people. Because there are no testimonies without a test. History lives on. Racism didn't start yesterday, and racism is not going to end tomorrow. The protests need to continue to happen. And it's us who have to continue to model and cultivate that for our young folks.
Thank you. Brian.
Thank you. There is a proverb that says that the exercise of justice is joy for the righteous, but is terror for the workers of iniquity. We've got to choose our sides. We've got to be very clear on what side do we fall. Do we fall on the side of righteousness, or do we fall on the side of iniquity? If we fall on the side of righteousness, then justice has to be the source of our joy. We can't straddle both lines. We can't live half of our lives with the enemy and half of our lives with our friends. And I'm not drawing a line between black and white there. This is a humanity thing. All humanity has to make a choice. Either you're for righteousness or you are for injustice. And if you choose justice, then the proverb says it'll be your joy. Like I said before, I don't mind taking blows for the people I love. I don't mind being traumatized for people I love, if it saves them some trauma. and I'll take the blows. We have to make a choice. And if we make the choice for justice, then the Spirit of God will live in us, act in us, and work justice in us for the bigger collective. So we have to first make a choice.
Thank you very much. I agree with those powerful words. I believe that we need to act. I don't think we need to stand in the sidelines anymore. I read history and I recall from history what people did who we have held up as righteous people. And it continues to happen to this day. But as Black people, I think that we have to decide what side is God's side and pitch our tent there and know to do the things that we are really supposed to do. I think that for me personally, for many years, I have supported multiple causes. I've supported several causes, including police organizations. But will I send another dollar to a police group? No. And for the first time yesterday, and it's even embarrassing to say that for the first time yesterday, I wrote out checks to Black causes, and I will continue to do that. I wrote checks, and I am now, from now on, I'm supporting Campaign Zero and the Equal Justice Initiative. I will continue to do that. That's the side that I have taken. We cannot stand in the sidelines anymore. It is true that the harvest is plentiful, and that the laborers are few. And that is the problem. The laborers are few because many of us are not taking a side. I have chosen to take a side, and I am doing that for my grandchildren and my great-grandchildren. I do not want another president of the United States to have the luxury of saying that a day like yesterday was good for my brother, George Floyd, who was killed. I do not want that to ever happen again. So we need
Outrageous.
to do right.
Absolutely outrageous.
Yes.
Offensive.
Absolutely. So that is where we stand. And this is a conversation that we're going to continue to have. I thank you very much for this day. Thanks for coming. And I look forward to continuing to have this conversation with you, my brother and my sisters. Thank you. But before we go, in terms of taking sides, I realized that in the past week, there have been demonstrations in Nigeria in support of the brothers and sisters here in the United States and against the death of George Floyd. I realized that just yesterday, there was a memorial service in Ghana in honor of George Floyd. But I also know that in those African countries, in some African countries, the military refuse to let people protest because we still don't see ourselves as one. We have those governments there that are afraid to go against the big power known as the United States. The Nigerians can afford to go against this guy because Nigeria is a very wealthy country. But many of those little countries in Africa couldn't do that. They had to kick their citizens off the streets. But I think that one of the things that we have to continue to do is to unite, understanding that this fight is the fight of all Black people. When a policeman stops me, he sees a Black person, and that's all he sees. So the fight is ours, and of course the scripture says that the battle is the Lord's, and we cannot forget him because that's how we got this far. So we have to continue to lean on him. But I do lean on every one of you, and I thank you. So have a very good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening, my fellow citizens. This afternoon, following a series of threats and defiant statements, the presence of Alabama National Guardsmen was required on the University of Alabama to carry out the final and unequivocal order of the United States District Court of the Northern District of Alabama. That order called for the admission of 2 clearly qualified young Alabama residents who happened to have been born Negro. That they were admitted peacefully on the campus is due in good measure to the conduct of the students of the University of Alabama, who met their responsibilities in a constructive way. I hope that every American, regardless of where he lives, will stop and examine his conscience about this and other related incidents. This nation was founded by men of many nations and backgrounds. It was founded on the principle that all men are created equal, and that the rights of every man are diminished when the rights of one man are threatened. Today we are committed to a worldwide struggle to promote and protect the rights of all who wish to be free. And when Americans are sent to Vietnam or West Berlin, we do not ask for whites only. It ought to be possible, therefore, for American students of any color to attend any public institution they select without having to be backed up by troops. It ought to be possible for American consumers of any color to receive equal service in places of public accommodation, such as hotels and restaurants and theaters and retail stores, without being forced to resort to demonstrations in the street. And it ought to be possible for American citizens of any color to register and to vote in a free election without interference or fear of reprisal. It ought to be possible, in short, for every American to enjoy the privileges of being American without regard to his race or his color. In short, every American ought to have the right to be treated as he would wish to be treated, as one would wish his children to be treated. But this is not the case. The Negro baby born in America today, regardless of the section of the state in which he is born, has about 1/2 as much chance of completing a high school as a white baby, born in the same place on the same day. 1/3 as much chance of completing college. 1/3 as much chance of becoming a professional man. Twice as much chance of becoming unemployed. About 1/7 as much chance of earning $10,000 a year. A life expectancy which is 7 years shorter, and the prospects of earning only half as much. This is not a sectional issue. Difficulties over segregation and discrimination exist in every city, in every state of the Union, producing in many cities a rising tide of discontent that threatens the public safety. Nor is this a partisan issue. In a time of domestic crisis, men of goodwill and generosity should be able to unite regardless of party or politics. This is not even a legal or legislative issue alone. It is better to settle these matters in the courts than on the streets, and new laws are needed at every level. But law alone cannot make men see right. We are confronted primarily with a moral issue. It is as old as the scriptures and is as clear as the American Constitution. The heart of the question is whether all Americans are to be afforded equal rights and equal opportunities, whether we are going to treat our fellow Americans as we want to be treated. If an American, because his skin is dark, cannot eat lunch in a restaurant open to the public, if he cannot send his children to the best public school available, if he cannot vote for the public officials who represent him, if, in short, he cannot enjoy the full and free life which all of us want, then who among us would be content to have the color of his skin changed and stand in his place? Who among us would then be content with the counsels of patience and delay? 100 years of delay have passed since President Lincoln freed the slaves, yet their heirs, their grandsons, are not fully free. They are not yet freed from the bonds of injustice. They are not yet freed from social and economic oppression. And this nation, for all its hopes and all its boasts, will not be fully free until all its citizens are free. We preach freedom around the world, and we mean it. And we cherish our freedom here at home. But are we to say to the world, and much more importantly, to each other, that this is a land of the free, except for the Negroes? That we have no second-class citizens, except Negroes? That we have no class or caste system, no ghettos, no master race, except with respect to Negroes? Now the time has come for this nation to fulfill its promise. The events in Birmingham and elsewhere have so increased the cries for equality that no city or state or legislative body can prudently choose to ignore them. The fires of frustration and discord are burning in every city, north and south. Where legal remedies are not at hand, redress is sought in the streets, in demonstrations, parades, and protests, which create tensions and threaten violence and threaten lives. We face, therefore, a moral crisis as a country and a people. It cannot be met by repressive police action. It cannot be left to increase demonstrations in the streets. It cannot be quieted by token moves or talk. It is a time to act in the Congress, in your state and local legislative body, and above all, in all of our daily lives. It is not enough to pin the blame on others, to say this is a problem of one section of the country or another, or deplore the facts that we face. A great change is at hand, and our task, our obligation, is to make that revolution, that change, peaceful and constructive for all. Those who do nothing are inviting shame as well as violence. Those who act boldly are recognizing right as well as reality. Next week, I shall ask the Congress of the United States to act, to make a commitment it is not fully made in this century to the proposition that race has no place in American life or law. The federal judiciary has upheld that proposition in a series of forthright cases. The executive branch has adopted that proposition in the conduct of its affairs, including the employment of federal personnel, the use of federal facilities, and the sale of federally financed housing. But there are other necessary measures which only the Congress can provide, and they must be provided at this session. The old code of equity law under which we live commands for every wrong a remedy. But in too many communities, in too many parts of the country, wrongs are inflicted on Negro citizens, and there are no remedies at law. Unless the Congress acts, their only remedy is the street. I am therefore asking the Congress to enact legislation giving all Americans the right to be served in facilities which are open to the public: hotels, restaurants, theaters, retail stores, and similar establishments. This seems to me to be an elementary right. Its denial is an arbitrary indignity that no American in 1963 should have to endure, but many do. I recently met with scores of business leaders, urging them to take voluntary action to end this discrimination. And I've been encouraged by their response. And in the last 2 weeks, over 75 cities have seen progress made in desegregating these kinds of facilities. But many are unwilling to act alone. And for this reason, nationwide legislation is needed if we are to move this problem from the streets to the courts. I'm also asking Congress to authorize the federal government to participate more fully in lawsuits designed to end segregation in public education. We have succeeded in persuading many districts to desegregate voluntarily. Dozens have admitted Negroes without violence. Today, a Negro is attending a state-supported institution in every one of our 50 states. But the pace is very slow. Too many Negro children entering segregated grade schools at the time of the Supreme Court's decision 9 years ago will enter segregated high schools this fall, having suffered a loss which can never be restored. The lack of an adequate education denies the Negro a chance to get a decent job. The orderly implementation of the Supreme Court decision, therefore, cannot be left solely to those who may not have the economic resources to carry the legal action or who may be subject to harassment. Other features will be also requested, including greater protection for the right to vote. But legislation, I repeat, cannot solve this problem alone. It must be solved in the homes of every American, in every community across our country. In this respect, I want to pay tribute to those citizens north and south who've been working in their communities to make life better for all. They are acting not out of a sense of legal duty, but out of a sense of human decency. Like our soldiers and sailors in all parts of the world, they are meeting freedom's challenge on the firing line, and I salute them for their honor and their courage. My fellow Americans, this is a problem which faces us all, in every city of the North as well as the South. Today, there are Negroes unemployed 2 or 3 times as many compared to whites. Inadequate education, moving into the large cities, unable to find work, young people particularly out of work, without hope, denied equal rights, denied the opportunity to eat at a restaurant or a lunch counter or go to a movie theater, denied the right to a decent education, denied almost today the right to attend a state university even though qualified.